In 2017, 42 people were killed in Washington state by law enforcement. Their lives mattered then, and they matter now. My name is Sonia Joseph. I am the mother of Giovanni Joseph McDade, who was killed by the Kent police June 24, 2017. He was 20 years old, a student, loved by his family and friends. On a Friday night, just before midnight, Giovanni was stopped and profiled for over 10 minutes at an AM/PM. The plates were expired. The officer believed the car was stolen. My son complied with the traffic stop and later fled the scene. Officer Roush pursued the vehicle and escalated the situation by using deadly force several times with a pit maneuver. In just over a minute, Giovanni was trapped in a cul-de-sac. Officer Davis parked his vehicle, got out, and placed himself on the side of Giovanni's car and shot 2 rounds into my son's car. Giovanni was shot, 1 bullet in the heart and the other in the right lung, killing him. My son would have not been stopped had he been white. Giovanni was not a threat. He was unarmed. He was a young man who tried to get away to save his life, and these officers murdered him. I urge you to take the next step and pass House Bill 1054 police tactics packaged into law. These policies will save lives. Thank you.
I see Representative Clifford has raised his hand. Do you have a quick question?
So, if I recall correctly, in your statement, you said my son would not have been stopped if he were white. I'm just wondering if you have any evidence to support that statement. It's a very powerful statement, and if there's evidence, I'd just like to hear what that evidence is. That evidence is. That evidence is. That evidence is. That evidence is.
She's screaming for her mother.
This is nothing new. Liberation has always been a mandate of the people, and those with power and privilege have always fought against it. The Washington Black Lives Matter Alliance is tracking more than 150 bills this session, life-saving legislation. Right now, we're fighting for laws that say, no, you cannot drive your car into us. You cannot use excessive force on our bodies. You cannot choke us until we're dead. And yes, we have the right to sue the police when a member of our family is murdered. The right to know when complaints are filed against cops. The right to free our communities of weapons of war. We demand accountability. We demand change. We demand reparations. Don't let the opposition silence your voice. Not in the streets, boardroom, classroom, or in Olympia where these laws are made. Our voice, our power for Black lives.
I don't really know what to say. So I'm taking a second with that video. That's the second time that I've seen it. Want to thank everybody who is here watching today and who's been taking the time to pay attention with what's going on right now. I'm Sakar Remu with Washington Black Lives Matter Alliance. I want to start with a land acknowledgement, and I want you to realize as we're saying these words that all of us have become so comfortable saying so quickly at the beginning of our gatherings. I want you to be thinking about that land and the things that happen on it, the things that you just saw on Duwamish and coastal Salish lands, home to the Duwamish, Suquamish, Snoqualmie, Tulalip, Muckleshoot, and Puyallup nations. As I said, my name is Sakara Remu. I'm going to give a second introduction for those who may have sight impairment. I am a Black woman. My pronouns are she, her. Today, I am sitting in my office. The sun is kind of streaming in the window behind me, sitting in a chair with a black back. My hair is pinned up today, and I'm wearing glasses. I'm joined today with some folks to talk about the work that is being done on police accountability and police tactics and oversight. This is work that we're doing every single day, whether we're in a legislative session or not, but here we are in a legislative session. And the things that lawmakers and community are in the process of accomplishing, not done yet, will bring life-saving change for Black and Brown people in Washington State. So I want to start with thanking and introducing Sonia Joseph, Tim Reynolds, and Leslie Cushman. And I will have you each also please introduce yourselves with a visual introduction as well. Ms. Joseph. Mute.
Sorry about that.
Okay. It's just a community conversation. It's all good.
Well, my name is Sonia Joseph. I'm in my office today, and I'm wearing a red shirt, and I have my hair curled. And thank you for having us here for these difficult conversations.
Leslie.
There we go. I'm unmuted. Thank you. I appreciate being included today. And my name is Leslie Cushman. I'm sitting in a classroom in my church. The lighting's kind of bad. I'm nearsighted with thick glasses. I have on a rust-colored jacket. I'm a white woman, and I'm 66 years old, and I'm a member of the Washington Coalition for Police Accountability. I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
Tim?
Aslachel Twagalapu, Si Abdiisha, Asquadida Chat Twagalapu. Good day to you, honorable and noble people, my dear people. We are grateful to each and every one of you. Tim Raynon Teedstock, Spoyala Popschad. My name is Tim Raynon. I'm a Puyallup tribal member and a former Puyallup Tribal Council member. I am sitting in my office in a black chair, wearing a black Justice for Jackie t-shirt that has Jackie's picture on it. And I just want to thank you, Sakara, for acknowledging the land that we all come to you on our traditional homelands for the Puyallup people. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that's actually a perfect segue into the first question, which is, how did you come to the work of fighting for police accountability? And Tim, maybe you could talk a little bit about that and also about Jackie.
Well, yes, Jackie's situation is how I got involved in this police reform, police accountability. Jackie was shot and killed by Tacoma police. Jackie and her unborn child were shot and killed by Tacoma police on January 28, 2016. So a little over 5 years ago. That killing had a devastating impact on our tribal community. We all felt it. When you do something to one of our tribal members, you do it to all of us. And so we started back in 2016 working on police accountability. We worked on Initiative 873. We worked on Initiative 940, and was part of getting Initiative 940 passed. I've had the opportunity of serving on the governor's task force on independent investigations, police use of force, and the legislative task force on police use of force and community policing. Crazy long names, but so we've been working, tirelessly trying to change policies, change the law, change the police culture to ultimately change behavior and save lives. So that's how I got involved. That's how the Puyallup tribe got involved.
Leslie, I think you're good to go to next because you were the citizen sponsor for I-940, correct?
Yeah, yes, I was. And I've been working with Tim since the spring of 2016, and I met Sonia in July of 2017, just a few weeks after her son Giovanni was killed. I started working in this area. So I'm sitting in my church in Olympia, Washington, and that's how I came to start working on racial justice issues. After Mike Brown was killed in Ferguson on August 9th, 2014, we began to focus here on this church on racial justice issues. And in May of 2015, Andre Thompson and Bryson Chaplin were shot in Olympia, and there was lots of activity in Olympia. They were not killed, they were shot. And Bryson ended up paralyzed. He's in a wheelchair. Tim and Sonia have both met them. They're part of our work. And I met Dr. Karen Johnson, who's just been appointed to the director of the governor's equity office. And she was forming the Black Alliance of Thurston County, and I was working with the Olympia Coalition to reform deadly force laws. And we coalesced and started working on a coalition, and we reached out to the Latino Civic Alliance and ACLU, and we brought some legislation. We came to the legislature in our first hearing in 2016, a couple days before Jackie had been killed. And we get to the hearing, and people, Reverend Walden whispers to me, the Puyallup tribe member was killed just a few days ago. And then a few weeks later, Andre Taylor's brother, Shay Taylor, was killed. And it went on and on and on and on. And that's why we're all here. We're here to stop the violence. We're here to address discriminatory policing. We're here to address over-policing in the Black and brown communities and marginalized communities. There's lots we can say, and I'll wait for my next question. I appreciate being here.
Thank you. Sonia, you're muted. There you go.
On June 24th, 2017, my son complied to a traffic stop and later fled the scene in his Honda. That video that you just watched was the two shots that killed my son. Officer Roush started a hot pursuit of my son's vehicle and escalated the situation by using deadly force several times. The officers trapped my son in a cul-de-sac. The shooting officer parked his vehicle, walked around his patrol car, and placed himself on the side of my son's car and shot 2 rounds. Officer Davis claims to have feared for his life while he walked towards a moving vehicle. Giovanni was not a threat. He was unarmed. Sure, he ran, but that doesn't warrant the use of deadly force. These officers violated department policies, escalated the situation, and murdered my son without repercussions of their actions. The shooting officer is now a trainer at the CJTC, training hundreds of new recruits how to de-escalate. I got involved with police reform immediately. A grassroots organization named Not This Time supported me and uplifted me and helped me to get organized for the fight on Initiative 940. And now I'm here with the Washington Coalition for Police Accountability because I want police reform and I want impacted families to have access to truth, transparency, and a chance at getting justice and accountability. And I want changes in policies that will help frame the future for policing in Washington.
I know that groups like Families Are the Front Line have been working on the systematic response to police use of deadly force and hoping to see change and accountability come there. And Sonia, you can say no, you don't want to answer this question, but I'm wondering if you would be willing to share, how did you become notified of what had happened to your son?
I did not get notified. 2:00 in the afternoon on Saturday, June 25th, I got a call from my brother-in-law, and he told me something happened to my son, and that it was urgent that I get to his grandmother's house. She lives in Newcastle, and she was the primary person that they contacted. I was never notified by law enforcement. I was never notified by the coroner's office. The only notification I had was third party and watching it on the news. And I think that, families have a right, parents have a right to know what happened to their child. And hearing it from the news or hearing it third party is just very disrespectful.
Leslie, I'm wondering, and Tim, if you can shed a little bit of light on the realistic aspect of this process, because I think for people that are kind of tapping in for the first time to the legislative process, it seems to be going kind of remarkably well when it comes to the number of bills that are in process right now. But this started many years ago. And so I'm wondering if you could both speak to the fits and starts, the challenges, the how you build a coalition around this to be able to get to this point where we are right now. Tim, she said, sorry, Sam, you got to go.
All right, I'll start us off.
And I'll follow up.
Good. I'm sure there will be plenty of things for you to fill in. Well, first and foremost, like you mentioned earlier, that we look to the families, the impacted families, first and foremost for direction, because that they're why we do this work, right? We're trying to prevent that circle of families from growing, and so we look to the families. We bring the families together and follow their lead. We reach out to our communities, different communities that we are a part of, and invite them in. And we've been doing this for several years now, and we all come together with a common goal, and we all have different ideas on how to get it done. But the beautiful thing that I've seen over these last several years of working with different communities is we all we all want the same goal. We want to stop the violence. We want to save lives. We want to make our community safer. And so focusing on those commonalities helps us move forward, helps us to come up with ideas that we can move forward with whether it's legislation or initiatives or whatever the case may be. And there are challenges, there's no question, because we are different. We have different cultures, different backgrounds. But by focusing on our commonalities as opposed to our differences, we're able to move forward. Leslie, you want to jump in here?
Yeah, Tim, thank you. At the Washington Coalition of Police Accountability is organized around families. We have 5 priorities, and those priorities were voted on and set by the families. And I'm gonna tell you what those are. Just, I know that you're gonna hear from legislators later, and they have lots of things they're working on. And I appreciate their package, but our package is coming from the community. It's been set by the families. It's the one that's important, okay? So House Bill 1054 addresses police tactics, and that's extremely important. House Bill 1202 addresses civil liability, so you can sue in court. Sonia had to go to federal court. The Thomases had to go to federal court. There's barriers in state court. So 1202 is super important. House Bill 1310 sets a duty of care. When 940, so when we worked on 940, we organized it around the families as well. Everything that's in 940 was about the experiences of families. Andre Taylor's brother and Davita Briscoe's brother bled to death. So 940 required that first aid be rendered at the scene. We attempted something with independent investigations that we learned is not successful, and we're working on House Bill 1267 for independent criminal investigations. And then, so let's see, I did 1054, 1202, 1310, 1267, and then Senate Bill 5051. It's about better composition, more community members at the Criminal Justice Training Commission, and then decertifying police officers for misconduct. And there's plenty of misconduct. And that's why the legislators have Senator Jamie Peterson and Judge Ann Levinson brought forward Senate Bill 5051. So that's incredibly important. So everything in our legislation is based on experiences of families. And I think we're obsessed, we're hardworking, we listen to each other. Coalitions are hard work, and we're in regular communication. And I'm a career government worker. I worked for the legislature, I worked for the state of Washington, then I worked for the Puyallup tribe, which is a government. And that's the skills I bring to the table, is the government piece. And it's hard to work at the legislature. We had an interesting advantage with the initiative because nobody could touch it. Nobody could monkey with it and amend it. And our issues now is keeping our package as intact as we can. And we want people's support on that. And the Washington Black Lives Matter Alliance we're amplifying your work, you're amplifying our work. It's great collaboration. Thank you.
100%. Something that you said earlier, Tim, I kind of wanted to just kind of go off the cuff and ask you, and Sonia also made me think of this when she was sharing her experience of not being notified, and a lot of this work being centered around families, and that we all do come from not just different experiences culturally, but literally different cultures. And I'm wondering, I'm thinking about my sister's uncle, David Walker, who was killed by the Seattle Police Department, who was Muslim. And I'm wondering, Tim, if you can speak to, maybe not specific to Jackie's situation, but in general, the disruption disrespect or disregard of culture and tradition when a law enforcement related death or murder happens.
Yeah, that's one of the things that we have done in 940 and in all of the legislation that we're working on is make sure that our tribal culture, traditions, and protocols are respected and adhered to when one of our members is involved in one of these killings. That's, I've heard time and time again that, our people aren't notified. And for Native communities, for Native, tribal members, many of us have a tradition that the individual needs to be laid to rest within 3 days. And so, we've been harping and really advocating that notification gets out to the families, gets out to the tribes immediately, no later than 24 hours after the incident. Because, and not only that, but there's certain things that, you need to do to protect the body and to take care of the body. And I know Jackie's family would approve of me saying this because we've mentioned it throughout the years, but with Jackie, they pulled her out of her car, and in the process of doing it, they broke her arm, and they threw her on the ground next to some garbage cans, and it just inexcusable. It cannot happen. And so that's why we've been so passionate about making sure that our tribal relatives are notified. That type of stuff cannot happen. We have to be respected. Our people have to be respected and taken care of. So we've been making sure that that's in every legislation that we're a part of.
Thank you, Tim, for that. As impacted families, we were kept out of the loop, without being notified of what's happening, what the process is. When this is the most, when your loved one is murdered, this is the most devastating thing in your life. And not to have transparency and not to have open dialogue and communication creates that mistrust that there's something going on. They don't want to share the truth, what's happening, and you are left in the dark to figure out what happened to your loved one. And you're searching for answers this whole time, and no one, I mean no one, reaches out to you. No one. You have no idea what is going on with your son's case. You have no idea what's going on with the investigation. You don't know what's happening with inquests. You don't know what's happening with if there's going to be prosecution. You don't know anything. And that's why we worked so hard during 940 to have these set standards of protocol. When someone is killed, what needs to happen? Their families need to be notified. They need to be kept in the loop every step and every process all the way through. And and family have to be involved and at the table when it comes to making these laws, because we're the ones that are impacted. And if we're not being heard, then are you really addressing, the issues of the community?
And in 1267, we've included a language in here. That's the independent investigation bill. We've included language to make sure that there is a tribal liaison, a family liaison, so that this type of lack of communication ends. Make sure that our families and our tribes and our communities are notified and kept informed about what's happening with the investigation. So that's just an example of how our experiences have informed the legislation.
Leslie, can you give a brief rundown, kind of a little bit, even to initiative language? What was I-940? How did we get to this task force to bills?
Okay. So I-940 had about 5 parts to it. It had required mandatory de-escalation training and mental health training through the Criminal Justice Training Commission. So all the new recruits have to have it, and all the incumbents have to have it. And then it addressed the first aid issue and required first aid at the scene. Then it addressed the justifiable use of force standard, which is known as the malice and good faith clause. That was removed by 940, and that prosecutors said that was a de facto immunity. That's in dispute whether that's true, but no one was convicted. There had been one prosecution since that law was put in effect in 1986, and then we put in place a requirement for independent investigations, but it was had a rudimentary. It just said that the involved agency couldn't be involved in the investigation. And then we created a large stakeholder group that included impacted communities at the table. And we listed, I don't have the list in front of me, but it was a lot of whoever police were coming in contact with. That's who we wrote a description of. And so when Sonia was talking about not being contacted by police, so after 940 was enacted, then we had a year of intensive implementation where we met regularly with the Criminal Justice Training Commission and law enforcement, working on 2 different sets of WAC. And we visited mayors. Tim and I have had multiple conversations with the mayor of Tacoma and with Pierce County prosecutor. Terry Rogers Kempt and I had multiple conversations with Chad Enright, the prosecutor of Kitsap County, and prosecutors from King County, on the phone with police chiefs and sheriffs. So we explored how 940 was working. And that is the basis. So when George Floyd was killed, and then when we learned the terrible revelations of Manuelis's suffocation and strangulation and his murder by Tacoma Police Department, I sent a text and I said, we have to go. We have to get ready. We're pivoting to legislation. And we formed the Washington Coalition for Police Accountability. And it's just the folks that are working on the campaign, and more families and more community organizations, includes Black Lives Matter Seattle King County, includes Asian Counseling and Referral Service, and many groups, about 18 families. And that's how we we started. So Representative Roger Goodman called me and said, what are you guys thinking? And I said, we're not thinking, we're doing. We have a list, we have priorities. And then we set up a Zoom meeting with legislators within the first few weeks of June. And we've been working with legislative leadership since then. And we have to stay focused. That's the progress of the work, and how we established our priorities. And it wasn't a brainstorm of wonder what's interesting. The families said, this is what needs to be done. And that's how we got to where we are today. Tim and Sonia, you've been there every step of the way. Does that process sound like what we've experienced?
Sonia, I have a question for you. The video that we showed at the beginning, shows an exchange with Representative Clippert. from a hearing recently. I was at that hearing as well. What is not shown in the video is the fact that you did answer Representative Clippert's question. You did provide him with empirical evidence to answer the question, and his response to that was, so you have no evidence to back up your assertion that this would not have happened to your son? Why are you filleting yourself, going through the emotional trauma to testify at these hearings?
Well, I'm doing this because of people like Clifford, of people who are opposing these bills and who are not holding life, the sanctity of life, at value. I continue to do this because my son was murdered, and many, many other people have been murdered, and they don't have a voice. And I don't, all I can do is speak my truth, and I was expecting scrutiny, and I know that I'll continue to be faced with the opposition and their opinions, but it doesn't matter to me because I believe in doing what's right. I believe in accountability, and I believe in justice, and I'll continue to fight for what's right.
So for the people in Washington State who believe in doing what's right and who believe in justice and who believe in accountability, what do they need to be doing right now, Sonia?
Well, it's fair to say that every family's experience is touched on all of these priority bills. And as a package, these 5 bills are based on problem solving, and the interactions with police on the streets, they need to be addressed. And House Bill 1054 addresses the police tactics, and House Bill 1310. and when someone is killed, you want families, people want an independent accountability and independent investigation, and that's done with addressing House Bill 1264, and when it comes to civil accountability in getting some type of justice for families with lawsuits. House Bill 1202 addresses that. And, the last part of decertification, we're tired of officers using deadly force and misconduct and then moving on to the next department without any repercussions. And so this tool, the Senate Bill 5051 for decertification addresses that. And, all these bills work together to make it a stronger system to protect the community and to improve the profession. And I'm hoping that these 5 bills are passed together as a package, and that the priorities are set in the expectations and rules which the community expects law enforcement to operate. And, these bills lay out the process of what happen, what can be done when law enforcement breaks policies and break the law. And these are levels of accountability and layers of accountability each step of the way, from using force to the investigation to addressing the civil liability and then the decertification. All of these bills are the layers of accountability each step of the way. And so it's important for the community to use your voice and write to the lawmakers and write to the representatives of, that you support these bills, because if you believe in accountability and families getting justice for officers involved shootings, then your next steps are to get involved and make those calls, make those emails, and use your voice, because this is it's the community that makes a difference in changing these policies. It was the community and a national outcry that made this movement move forward. And it's still the community that has to take these steps to be accountable for our lives and hold our representatives accountable and demand accountability and demand action. Sorry, I just ran with that.
It was perfect. Don't apologize. It was perfect. Tim, and then Leslie, I'm going to come to you with kind of final thoughts. I think that tribes have always been an impactful presence in Olympia. I mean, there's no question about that. But I'm curious as to the level of involvement. Kind of, what is your perspective on the level of involvement, or how involvement has changed with tribal members getting into individual advocacy and like really getting into the nuance of how does a bill become law and the legislative process around these kinds of issues? Is this becoming more fluent in community?
Yeah, I think definitely there's more involvement of our tribal members, getting involved in issues that are important to the tribe, particularly this issue. I mean, tribes and tribal members have been impacted by, police violence for generations, ever since the colonizers came to our lands. And so, with this rise in this movement towards police accountability, our people have been right there. We've Justice for Jackie was part of the movement for Initiative 940, and we've continued to work together to go to other tribes as part of 940, and even as part of our work on this legislation. We have visited every single reservation in the state of Washington. We did a res to res tour, is what we called it, where we visited all 29 tribes in 10 days to let people know what to do, what they could do individually as a tribal government. We've had lots of support over the years with moving these issues forward. And it's because, like I said, we have historically been abused by the system. Systemic racism is something we're very, very aware of. Our tribe just memorialized the 50th anniversary of the fishing wars, where state, local, and federal agents sat atop this bridge on our reservation overlooking our sacred ceremonial grounds, and were pointing their guns and raiding our ceremonial grounds, you know, because we were exercising our right to fish. And so, yeah, we are our tribes throughout Washington are very much involved in this. And we don't want any more of our people to die at the hands of police. And so these issues are very important to us. And we have individuals that are, you know, getting involved. We have, you know, 3 or 4 tribes involved in the coalition. Individuals, tribal members testifying down in Olympia. You know, we're ready if we need to do more initiatives, we're ready to jump on and then keep the ball rolling. We've got to get this changed, and now's the time. And it's never been more right. So our people are there.
Leslie, as important as it is for lawmakers to hear from impacted communities and impacted families, what about allies and just Washingtonians who have a higher vision and greater expectation for what community safety is and what the police accountability looks like? Go ahead, lecture them, lecture the people, go for it.
Absolutely. This is the classic opportunity for allies and accomplices to come and stand alongside, and don't substitute your judgment. The communities have already established the priorities here. Families are setting out what the workload is and what the asks are, and it's the right time. We have lots of allies working with us, and we need more. We need to keep the pressure on lawmakers. There's law enforcement has a big presence in lawmakers' minds. This notion of law and order and the ability to do dog whistles and put fear in lawmakers' hearts. I know Tim mentioned systemic racism, but we're dealing with the origins of policing in enslavement, and I think law enforcement actually needs to. What we're doing is taking discriminatory tactics off the table to the extent that we can, and then putting in the duty of care. We're saying if you can't grapple with this yourself, we're just going to take some things off the table. And it's unfortunate we can't take a lot of it off the table, because there is the discriminatory policing is the nature of policing, right? And we need folks to stand with us and stand up to this and demand change. We do hope that at some point law enforcement is going to grapple with what we worked with at the in 940 and at the Criminal Justice Training Commission is all law enforcement officers now take an intensive course called the History of Race and Policing, and I have been through some of it, and it is good. It's intense. Officers go away saying, "I never heard that. I didn't know that." Really. That's what it's all about. And if that is your history, if that's how your routines and practices have been built, and you haven't learned that or questioned it, you're going to have practices that are discriminatory. That's the basis of it, and we're trying to grapple with that. And we appreciate. I appreciate that you're going to have Representative Johnson and Senator Dingra, and the priorities that we are working on are foundational, and the other issues that they're working on can layer on top of that, but we really need our 5 priorities enacted. They're foundational. They're going to change the culture of policing, and they change the culture of accountability. There'll be a big gap if we don't get these 5 bills passed. So we've been told that, you can't get it all passed, and it's like, are you kidding? Of course you can get it all passed. You can get these 5 bills passed. We know
you can get all 10 passed.
Yeah, absolutely. We can get ours and theirs, and we're working on theirs with them. So it's all doable. it's all manageable. Let's manage expectations in a big uplifting way. So there you have it.
Oh, goodness. Ashe. Yes, speaking of lawmakers, we are going to pull them up shortly. But before we switch over and go, I just wanted to, again, thank you all for making the time to be here to share yourselves, share your knowledge, share your wisdom, share your heart, Sonia, and just ask, starting with Tim, if there are any final thoughts or directives to the people.
I just want to thank you, Sakara, and everybody with your organization for giving us this opportunity to share some thoughts and for, you know, pushing the issues, getting us together like this and getting the word out. We need everybody to, like Sonia said, contact your legislators, tell them to support this package, not just one individual bill. This package is the foundation for change that we need. And so I just raise my hands to each and every one of you, everybody that's out there that is working so hard to get these bills passed. We're in the position we are because of all of your efforts. So thank you so much. Hey, Shabbat Hisquot, CEO. Thank you, honorable, noble people.
Well,
Yeah, Sonia, final word to you, please.
I want to say.
Yeah, go ahead.
So, you know, the final thought for me is that justice delayed is justice denied. And your voice matters. And I don't care who you are. If you apply yourself and your energy and your heart to do the work and fight for change, you can do it. And please, just take the next steps and help be part of history and change the laws.
Thank you. Thank you all again. I'll see you in a few days in Olympia, no doubt. Thank you for being here. Peace. We have Representative Jesse Johnson and Senator Manfred Dingra are about to join us, but we have a quick video that we're going to show you first.
Hi, I am Manfred Dingra, Deputy Majority Leader in the State Senate.
Hi, I'm Bob Hasagawa, State Senator for the 11th Legislative District.
This is Senator Patty Cooter from the 48th Legislative District.
My name is Jamie Peterson. I represent the 43rd District.
Hi, it's Susan. Thank you to all the organizers and people who are showing up to push for change during Black Lives Matter Action Week.
I want to congratulate you for organizing a Black Lives Matter Action Week and hope that you all participate in some way, shape, or form.
The unfortunate truth in America is that the darker your skin color, the harder life is for you. The darker your skin color, the more likely you are to suffer violence at the hands of the police. That is not justice.
Generations of injustice and systemic racism demand that we stand up and make our voices heard.
Change will come when each and every one of us acknowledges this injustice, when each and every one of us grieves for this injustice, and when each and every one of us works to dismantle the systems of oppression and racism.
We need to march forward and make sure that the legislature is hearing our collective voice.
We are headed into week 6 in the legislative session, which is crunch time.
This is a key cutoff week, so most bills need to be approved by their committees to be considered further.
We need you to continue to speak up. It truly makes a difference when your legislators hear from you.
So I encourage you to continue using your voice.
Talk to your legislators and make sure that this session is one where we make a dramatic difference.
Black Lives Matter.
Black Lives Matter, Black Voices Matter, and Black Futures Matter.
Hello. So for folks that may have joined a little late, I am Sakara Remu with the Washington Black Lives Matter Alliance. I'm here with Senator Menka Dhingra and Representative Jesse Johnson. A quick visually accessible introduction for me. I'm a Black woman. I'm sitting in my office right now. I took my glasses off. They were on earlier. I'm wearing a shirt that says Black Lives Matter, sitting in a black chair. There's a seam there. Now go ahead and pass it on to Representative Johnson. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. My name is Jesse Johnson. I represent the 30th Legislative District, specifically in my hometown of Federal Way. I'm a Black man with locks and a beard, sitting in my office with my bookshelf behind me, representing my favorite books. I think I have an Afrocentric picture on the wall as well. I think my wife got it from somewhere. I work in the legislature on a variety of issues, primarily through my role as Vice Chair of Public Safety, standing in solidarity with all the families. They did a great job, and making sure that unnecessary police violence ends this year. So honored to be with you today.
Thank you. Senator Dhingra.
Thank you so much. My name is Manka Dhingra, the state senator representing the 45th Legislative District. I am a Sikh Indian woman with long brown hair, wearing a dark pink dress, sitting in my office. The wall behind me is completely bare and in desperate need of me to put in some artwork. And it really is such a pleasure for me to be here with all of you today. Thank you. And my pronouns are she and her.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you both so much for taking the time, because we're on the other side of it working it, and it's crazy. You're in it working it, so I can only imagine how crazy it is. But it also seems to be working, this virtual how a bill becomes a law in 2021. Kind of two-part question. How's it going overall? We're like a third of the way into session. So kind of overall, how is it going? And then the second part of that question is, from your point of view, what is community engagement and advocacy looking like as the recipients of it? I'll start with you, Representative Johnson. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, thank you, Sakara. Well, we had a really intense election this year. There was so much stress, and there still is, from this pandemic, the social unrest, the racial reckoning. So although session feels really challenging right now and very difficult and time consuming, it's nothing compared to what communities have gone through this year. 2020 revealed the amount of work we have to do to become an anti-racist society. I think our communities have experienced so much pain and suffering. We saw the ongoing protest, the growing demand for our government to address the issues in our communities. And, people of color have been sounding this alarm for years, but I see the broad-based coalitions forming and demanding action. So I'm empowered, inspired, and motivated to get these bills done.
Literally empowered to get the bills done, like literally empowered by the people to get the bills done. Senator Dhingra.
Thank you. It definitely is a very unusual session. We have had to pivot, just like everyone else in our country, to deal with the pandemic. Logistically, we are able to do the bills. We're getting them passed. It's some of the challenges really are, many times in Olympia, you can catch that quick conversation, network really quickly, get an agreement on something, make sure you're addressing an issue. And that happens very organically and very quickly as you are physically next to people. That is a lot harder in a virtual arena. So, I'm lucky if, normally my day starts at 7:30 in the morning, and I'm lucky if I'm done with 9 at night, because you then have to schedule a lot of those meetings that you able to do. So the collaboration is something that I feel you really have to make a really large effort in making sure you're engaging in, because it's not happening the way it normally does. And so I think for those of us where that is very important, our days are getting very long, which is fine, because I think the collaboration is very, very important. The other part, which I think is a huge positive, is that we truly are seeing people being able to access the lawmakers, being able to access the hearings in a way they have never been able to. Earlier you had to drive to Olympia, take the whole day, find transportation, find childcare, take the day off from work in order to come participate. And, that's not doable for everyone. Now you sign on, you get a Zoom link, you can testify. And if you don't want to testify, you can simply sign in support of the bill. And that is what I'm seeing from the community, which I so greatly appreciate. I love that I see you there testifying. I love that I see Sonia there testifying. But being able to then see all the people that are supporting the bill and are not testifying is huge. Because when I then need to advocate for a bill, I can say that even the 2 people testified pro, 350 testified in support of. And to me, that's where that number is powerful. This is how you're making your voice heard, by signing in support, sending emails, calling legislators, and it is very powerful. So please continue doing it, and we'll make sure moving forward that this level of access continues to be available, regardless of whether or not we're in a pandemic.
That was going to be my next question is, are you all having conversations already about how you both end this when things return to a new normal?
Not so much. I'll say I think we're just trying to get through this session. It's on a daily basis. I will get an email or a comment from someone saying, thank you so much for making this so accessible. So I, for one, personally would love to see how we can continue doing at least a hybrid, if not a different version of what we're doing right now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, just to add to that, I would agree. I think the remote testimony has shown us that we have been unequitable for a long time. And so at least having that remote testimony continue this year, it's made testimony so much easier for families and communities and young people, like the senator mentioned. And we not only have an arduous path of getting the legislation passed, but then to make sure it's being enforced on the ground, right? So we have a lot of work to do. And this is an important session. And this has just shown us the more people we can engage on these issues and amplify their voices, the better the policies are going to be, the more efficient our system is going to be. So because of that purpose, I think we should continue that work going beyond this year.
So you made a good point there, Representative Johnson, about the implementation aspect of it and and accountability for implementation, that it's not just, hey, the bill, woo, passed into law. That, can you speak a little bit more to what that potentially could and will look like once these bills do become law, claiming it?
Yeah, and that's the work ahead, right? We have flawed policies and flawed institutions. So, for example, on the police tactics bill, to make sure that these bans hold in our communities, it's going to take our civil rights advocates, it's going to take our legal experts and our law enforcement, hopefully accomplices, coming together to make sure that that happens. But community has to have some accountability mechanism for that. And so that's why, like Sonia mentioned, all of these bills work together in tandem. They're a constellation of different parts that make up a whole package. And so it's important that the enforcement mechanism for these bills is passed as well, not just the bans or the use of force. And so I think that it's all going to work together to make our communities safer. But at the same time, we have to realize that to fix these problems, we're going to need to center the voices of our families, of our community in the process. And so that's what it's going to look like for me, at least, is to make sure we keep pushing, we keep advocating and agitating the system and picking on our battles so that we can fight these policies in the courts, in the law, and then on the ground in the streets.
And can one of you, in kind of the simplest terms for folks who are kind of getting into this process really for the first time this year, explain, I mentioned earlier, we're kind of 1/3 of the way into the process. So what does that mean? Where are we? And then what comes next?
Sure, I'm happy to take that. So, this is going back to what we learned in high school, which none of us really paid that much attention to. So, we have the House and the Senate. And so we have bills that are in either or both of those chambers. And so the first 1/3 is about the bills making their way through each of the chambers. So we have policy cutoff, which means that after policy cutoff, if a bill that's dealing with policy hasn't had a hearing and been execed out of that committee, that bill is dead. And so that's why you have this rush in the first few weeks to make sure your bill gets a hearing and then you get it exec out of committee. So I am just so grateful that this session, the bills that we really truly care about, have made it through the policy cutoff. The next is the fiscal cutoff. And, I say this very often. You can have a wonderful bill and, it sounds great because they're great words on a piece of paper. But if you do not put the dollars behind that, it's just a good novel and that's it. And so the critical part is Monday, which is fiscal cutoff, which means these great bills that have these great words need to pass out of the fiscal committee and onto the floor. And so I think the vast majority of the bills that we have talked about already, I think are out of the fiscal committee. So that's great. If there are a few stragglers, we really need to make sure that those are getting out too, because that's what Monday is. After they have gone through the fiscal committee, now they have to come onto the floor for a vote. And that's another place where a lot of bills die. And so it's very, very crucial for all the advocates to make sure that they're calling all the members who are on the Rules Committee. The Rules Committee members are the ones that can pull a bill onto the floor. So making sure that these bills are pulled to the floor. Only once they are brought to the floor can the chamber vote for it. And so that's what we're going to have to do in the next few weeks. Then we have cutoff for the House of Origin, which means all the bills that have passed through the Senate will now go through the same process in the House. And all the bills that have passed through the House will go through the same process in the Senate. So we have to do the same thing all over again. And so we're not halfway through, people. We're only 1/3 way. So let's make sure we get all of these great bills onto the floor, vote them out, and then repeat it again for the next chamber.
So let's kind of triangulate three things here. The pulling of the bills, so that can be done kind of individually for bills, and it can also be done as a package. And one of the things that people have been asking us, I shouldn't have touched it, and it starts talking to me. One of the things that people have been asking us, and we'll be putting out an update, good people, is what's next? What's next? How did it go with all of the action alerts that we sent out? So we'll be getting ready to send out that update, and then the what's next. Senator Dinkra, as you said when we were off air, a lot of these things that have a lot of support will just get kind of packaged and go. So we'll talk about the ones that don't. But first, wanted to speak, have you, Representative Johnson, speak to, obviously this past week we put a great deal of emphasis on police accountability, tactics, oversight, et cetera, bills, making sure they got through that 1/3 process that Senator Dinkra just described. So what are you thinking strategy-wise is going to be next? We've got the package that we heard about earlier. There's kind of a larger package that I saw you sent some of our GR team, a thing that I glanced at. You may not have it fully baked, but I'm wondering if you can give folks kind of an idea in the next week of where you think things will be going.
Yeah, I'll speak really briefly just on, I think, Senator Dinkra and I's challenge and then the community. So for us, the challenge is getting our leadership to believe that this bill can pass, because we will never send a bill to the floor when we're in the majority in the Democratic side that we do not think can pass. And so we do this thing called vote counting. And so we're starting that process this week to see which members have concerns, which don't. And we're across the spectrum in our caucus. We have members that are abolitionists. They don't believe that prisons and police should exist. We also have people that believe there's absolutely nothing wrong with our law enforcement. And so we're across a whole spectrum and getting to the point where we believe that this bill could pass amongst the totality of our caucus. And so making individual phone calls to our colleagues is something I started doing last week, but it's really important that we figure that out before they get to the floor, because we do not want to get to the floor and then you have a Republican put 40 amendments on a bill. Our caucus members get spooked and vote against it. And so the bill dies. So we got to make sure we figure that out. From the community perspective, and I know Senator Dinkra, you may be able to add to this because you have the historical perspective of being there longer. But I believe that the best thing that we can do, there's power in numbers. The more people that have sign-on letters from community, sending emails, reaching out and calling legislators. That's what changes things, because law enforcement is doing that work as we speak. And, I think it's important that community has their voices elevated in this process and works together. I always say, like, plot, plan, organize, and mobilize. Right now, we're in the, we've plotted and planned for the longest. We've organized. We got to mobilize what we've organized at this point and get the word out about what we believe and why these bills are important, and getting it out to every single legislator, especially those in difficult districts. So that's the advice I'd give.
I'll just add, I love that Jesse said Montana has a historic perspective. That's 3 years. I will say our last national election changed so many of us who decided to run for office who had never run before. So yes, I do have a historic perspective of 3 years. But for a lot of us who are new to politics, we also do not, we don't take no. We don't believe that it's okay to do things slowly. I'm not here to have a conversation in Olympia. I'm here to pass laws. And so to me, if we have done the work and introduced a bill, I want to see that actually get to the governor's desk. So it is a different way of thinking where, waiting for next session to me is not acceptable. And I think that is true for a lot of us new lawmakers. So I'll give you the historic perspective for the last 3 years. And I say, this is where that vote counting is very important. This is where, when I say all of you, call your personally elected leaders and let them know that you want them to vote yes on this. Because it is true, when you are in the majority, you are not going to bring a bill to the floor that the majority of your caucus is not going to support. So you have to be able to show that that bill has the support of the majority of the Democrats. And, unfortunately, the Democratic Party is a big tent. And we have people from lots of different points of views on it. And that's a good thing. But this is where that advocacy is so key and so critical. The other reality is also things are different because of COVID. There are a lot of things that can happen when we're in person, because let me tell you, if you pull that bill at 10 o'clock at night for floor and there are 50 amendments, after a couple of hours, people are going to get tired and maybe pull their amendments so we can pass the bill. When you're sitting in the comfort of your home, people may be willing to add more amendments because they're at home. And so there are different pressures at play and strategies on how to get the bill across. But that pressure from the community has to be there. It cannot let up.
And do you have one or two bills, Senator, that you think need that greater pressure and support from community to lawmakers?
Absolutely. I have been working on criminal justice reform for so many years. And to me, when we talk about, Black Lives Matter, when we talk about criminal justice reform, when we talk about police accountability, the police accountability is one component of it. We talk about institutional racism and systemic racism and historical racism. That exists in every aspect of our community. Absolutely, the police accountability has elevated it to a whole level. But when you talk about birth, access to education, access to housing, access to school, college, behavioral health services, the list goes on and on and on. And so while I love that this is the focus, and when the caucus has said that is their priority, I think that's great. But I think we also need to highlight other bills that help us get to the same point. So in that regard, I will call it a different level of priority. But the two that I personally would love to highlight is Senate Bill 5035. And that is a bill that actually washes out convictions for drug possession. We know that in communities of color, that the way in which drug possession cases have been enforced have led to disproportionate impact on brown and Black families. And so this bill basically says that after 5 years of a conviction, that conviction washes out for felony points. And to me, this is really critical because we have started treating drug cases differently. And, in all honesty, it's because look at the demographics that have changed over time as to who is ODing on drugs. And when that demographic changed, all of a sudden we saw public health impact on it. But those convictions from all those decades ago, they're still on the books impacting people. So, that to me is a big priority bill. The second one is 5067, which is conditional commutation. It really says those individuals who've been in a prison for 15 years, 20 years, and 25 years deserve someone to take a second look at who they are as a human being. And, I've been a prosecutor for 19 years, and I'll tell you, prosecutors, law enforcement officers see people at their worst. Doesn't mean that is who they are. That is just one day. And so we have to be able to take a look at the human being and really make sure that we are understanding what that human being has gone through, where they are in that journey, and make sure that we are willing to give people second chances. So I will stop that. I have lots more bills that I can talk about, but those two to me, are just part of this entire conversation on how we treat people.
And I just want to interject just really quickly though, because I was talking to a group of girls about this yesterday who were interested in learning more about the movement and what's going on in Olympia. And I was telling them, we're not there for police accountability. We're there for the whole of Black life. We're there for the whole of Black life. We have 150 bills that we have put either our thumb or our whole body on the scale to try and move, to try and educate the people, to try and educate the lawmakers, to try and educate the agencies that are involved. We know that some of these things are just 1 + 1 = 2. There hasn't been the political will, which I told the girls is you, to move these things. And that's one thing that we are trying to, do well this year in service of community, to enfranchise them into this process, educate them on how a bill becomes a law, but also help people understand in all areas. We're talking about from womb to before womb to our elders, that we are in Olympia and in our communities fighting for the whole of Black life. There is not an advocate out there that is fighting against police brutality who isn't also fighting for children to be fed. That's just the reality of the situation. So I appreciate you not just elevating those, but also it's both and, not one or the other. And that's what I think that people who call themselves allies to the movement need to understand, is we're not just coming for one thing. We're coming for the whole of Black life. So when we get these 10 bills passed into law, we will still be working on other things that need support to get done, that help to, again, deinstitutionalize our minds, our bodies, our lives, and institutionalize our power. Representative Johnson.
Thank you so much, Sakara. Couldn't have said that any better. That was brilliant. I just wanted to say, in terms of the young people, I wanted to shout out one of my bills, House Bill 1140, which will provide access to an attorney for every young person that's stopped and questioned by police. A lot of folks don't know this, but in our state, youth of color represent 28% of the general population, but 48% of youth in county detention and 59% of youth in JR. So our youth are being doing a disservice from our system. And so obviously this is exacerbated for our Black youth, and we need to make sure that we are providing the counsel that they need, the constitutional right to counsel for our young people when they're being stopped by police, even in the schools with our school resource officers. And we know that our youth of color experience trauma associated with policing. And so when they're stopped and questioned, a lot of times they're scared, they're disempowered, they're vulnerable. And so how do we make sure that they are able to make the best decision for themselves in that moment? And we have to provide that access to an attorney. So wanted to shout out House Bill 1140, but I really agree with what you're saying with our young people. We got to meet them where they're at and educate them about their rights. When you know your rights, you're able to lead your life and know what you deserve, right? And so it's really important for our young folks to know the rights that they have in this country. And I did not know anything about rights to counsel, rights to silence, Miranda rights, until I started learning about this bill a few years ago. And it's just so important that we empower them with that information. So I just wanted to shout that out real quick.
And I'll just double that. I love that bill that Jesse has. And I told my son when, he turned 14, very minor conversation than what everyone else that Black families have. Mine was a very tiny conversation where I just simply said, you need to ask, am I free to go? And if the officer says yes, you walk away. But absolutely, our children need to know what their rights are, and they need to know when they're free to go and when they're not.
And they also need to know that those rights apply in school, whether or not there's an officer there or not. You have the right to remain silent, not answer questions. And when I teach families education advocacy, one of the things I teach them is your child doesn't give statements at school. Your child does not write things down at school. Your child comes home and tells you what happened. You help them put the statement together, then you get it back to the school the next day. But that is like the entryway of the school to prison pipeline of criminalizing age-appropriate behavior, weaponizing children against children. Children don't know when they've witnessed something that it breaks a policy or breaks a community rule or breaks a federal law. But that is where the trap basically is sprung for them, is in school discipline that will quickly spill out to law enforcement involvement. And for law enforcement officers that work in schools, again, school education and civil rights and human rights for children is kind of a huge part of my background. I saw countless officers say to Black and brown kids who would say, like, I think you need to call my mom or my auntie. I don't think I really need to talk to you. The cops would say, without fail, why don't you tell me what you think your rights are, and I will tell you if you are right. And I would say, you have the right to remain silent. Conversation's over. That's it. So parents, families, you need to know that your child should not do that at school. And you also need to empower your children to call you from school and to have teachers call you. Don't get upset when the school calls. I had to reprogram that. I just had to put that out there since we were on the topic of protecting children, because I've seen it with my own kids, seen it with so many kids, that is where, and then even thinking about, Sonia's talking about the death of her child, but when are parents notified that their child has been pulled into a legal situation? If they don't have legal representation, nobody that is in the system is required to tell the parent or the family your child has been pulled into a legal situation. So this is something that the BLM Alliance is supporting. It's one of our priorities, is this bill. No shortage of work. No shortage of the work.
Can I shout out one more bill? It's not my bill.
Yes, please do. Yes.
House Bill 1090 on closing down private prisons.
Oh, yeah.
Obviously, the impetus behind this bill is the infamous Northwest Detention Center in Tacoma. But we have to close down private for-profit prisons. I'm really excited that Rep. Ortiz Self brought this bill forward. Excited to be a co-sponsor, because we have heard the last few years about the inhumane conditions of that facility. Lack of access to healthcare, meals infested with maggots, and horrible practices that we see there. And so this is about criminalization of our immigrant community. It's a moral human rights issue. So we have to uplift that bill and get those finally banned in our state.
Criminalization of our brown immigrant community, because that's who they incarcerate. They don't incarcerate our white immigrant community. Senator,
can I do a quick thing on this? So this is actually a really perfect example of a bill that actually passed the Senate last year. We passed it off the Senate floor and it died in the House. And so the strategy for this bill this session was, because the House couldn't pass it, let's have the bill start in the House and send it to the Senate, because we know that the Senate already passed it last session. And so while I hope we never have to have the strategy for any of the bills we discussed today, I just wanted to make sure people were aware of like certain strategies for year two that we can engage in and learn from what happened in year one.
Thank you. Well, I don't have any other questions for you. And I know y'all are really busy. Do you have a final thought that you want to share with folks before we move on to our final testimony for the day?
I'll just talk more about the legislative process. I do want to be a realist. I am very, very optimistic right now. All the bills are doing really well. They're in the right spot. But I want us to make sure while we are optimistic about it, we cannot take our foot off the pedal. This is where a lot of the bills die in the next 2 weeks. And so this is really, really crunch time. This is the time to make sure you are doing everything you can to make sure that bill gets pulled and we get the votes on the floor. It is very, very critical. So I just want to thank everyone for the work they have been doing for years. And all that great work has brought us to this place where I really have such optimism. But I just want to caution everyone to say this is really crunch time. So please, everyone, activate, make those phone calls, do those vote counts. If someone is unsure about a bill, flag it for anyone else who can talk them through the policy issue. Let's make sure we're having that conversation with that elected who has reservations so we can overcome those reservations. And it's those conversations that can help us get that vote that we need. So anyone who's reluctant, anyone who's hesitant, let's make sure we engage in that conversation, in that dialogue to get them to a yes.
Representative Johnson, do you have any final thoughts?
I just want to uplift what Senator Dingra said. As you know, we have a saying in our community, lift every voice, and every voice has to be lifted up in this process. And so, you know, folks have their stories, their lived experiences, and that needs to be heard by legislators on why they have to support these bills. And so it's really just us coming together to transform the system. And we've done it for 6-7 months now, working with community on these bills. And now we're literally in this final stretch. And I know folks are burnt out. It's been a long marathon, but we have to get these bills across the finish line in order to make sure all of that work was not in vain this year. So, you know, it's also justice for the many folks that have died at the hands of police. I was heartbroken hearing Sonia's story about her son, Giovanni. You know, Jesse Saray, Manny Ellis, so many in our state, obviously Charlena Lyles. We have to get justice for them, and that's passing these bills and making sure that their lives and the work that has went into this process were not in vain. So let's get this done.
Thank you. Thank you to everybody that was with us today from the community panel, and to our lawmakers, Representative Johnson and Senator Dingra, for being with us today. And as the representative said, our final voice will be the voice of the community. So lift every voice. Thank you again.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Nakia?
Chair Ormsby, members of the committee. My name is Nakia Hunter. I'm a member of the Washington Coalition for Police Accountability. My brother Carlos Hunter was killed in Vancouver, Washington in 2019 while being served a warrant. The police used a traffic stop to serve the warrant. The events that unfolded at this traffic stop were unnecessarily violent. I believe that his death was entirely avoidable. He left behind 6 children who I am raising with my family. Since I-940 was passed, there have been over 100 deaths from the police use of deadly force in the state of Washington. In many of these cases, the police escalated the situation and did not take the time to slow down, to consider alternatives, and to use the minimum force necessary. The Criminal Justice Training Center has been training police on de-escalation for over a decade. We have come too far to let a lifetime of systemic racism and discrimination against us, the BIPOC community, in employment, housing, education, and life liberty, keeping us perpetually trapped and ultimately killed. House Bill 1310 meets the public's expectations that alternatives will be exhausted before using deadly force. It will make us all safer, the community and the police. Thank you.